Hello, I know a bunch of you are new to the idea of a role-playing game, so I'm going to be teaching you about what that is. Part 1. What is a role-playing game? First thing you need to know about a role-playing game is, unlike other board games we play sometimes, this is very different in that it's not about winning, this is about storytelling. Remember, it's storytelling, not winning. You're going to be working with other players, you're going to be with a GM, game master, okay? They're the person kind of running the game. You're not competing with them, you're not competing with one another, you're working together to tell a cool story. Keep that in mind. I'll give you an example of how sometimes players might not keep this in mind. For instance, if the GM says you come across a Balrog and you're like, a Balrog, what's that? And you roll knowledge and you get a really low roll. So the GM says something like, the Balrog, you've heard rumors that Balrogs are scared of fire, okay? Now, you, the player, know that that's probably not actually true because you got a low roll. This is sometimes called metagaming. If you were playing to win, you would probably then ignore that information. But if you were being true to the story, you would hopefully then, as a character, go off of those actions, even though we all know that Balrogs aren't scared of fire because they're made of fire. The second important part to role-playing is imagination. The GM will be describing things and it's important for you to play along with those things. Other players will be pretending to do things. It's important for you to stand up and pretend. And I like to really encourage people to actually stand up and act out the things they're doing. But I also encourage you to be creative and do cool stuff. In role-playing, we call these declarations, declare cool things. For instance, the game master describes you wake up and there's an old man and he's looking through your bag of stuff. You could do so many things. You can declare so many things. You could say, I try to get in a fist fight with a guy. Or if you're not a good fighter, maybe say, I try to tell a lie about how great of a fighter I am to scare him off. Or perhaps you search for a weapon around to see if you can use it against him. Perhaps you pretend you're sleeping and wait for the opportune moment. Perhaps you try to grab the bag and hide it from him. Perhaps you try to convince him that stealing is evil and that he should give up his ways. There are so many options. The third thing that makes role-playing unique is rules. In a role-playing game, you're not invincible and you're going to succeed and you're going to fail. If you're a really, really strong warrior, you're not going to be able to kill every opponent. And if you're a famous doctor, you're not going to be able to save every single patient. Just like in real life, you'll have good moments, you'll have bad moments. And a lot of the times, this is going to be determined by dice. Part 2, character sheets and dice rolling. Dice are a huge part of role-playing games. They're really fun. You get to chuck them in things and you're like, ah, or yes. It adds a lot of excitement. And it's great too because even if you're really good at something, you can still fail at it. And even if you're really bad at something, sometimes you can succeed. A great example of this is Han Solo. In Star Wars, Han Solo is a really good liar. If you looked at the amount of dice he'd be able to roll for a con, it'd be really high. However, he still has moments where he just kind of botches it. For instance, in the original Star Wars movie, when he's on the intercom and he goes,
everything's under control, situation normal.
What happened?
It's like weapons malfunction, but everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now, thank you. How are you?
We're sending a squad in.
Negative. We have a reactor leak here now. Give us a few minutes to lock it down. Large leak, very dangerous.
Who is this? What's your operating number?
We're in conversation anyway.
Look, we're gonna have company!
So this is a character sheet. It's actually one of your character sheets. I just haven't written the name in yet. But as you can see, you've got several attributes: dexterity, agility, strength, perception, knowledge, technical, and charisma. And each of these have little stats next to it. Each of these also have 3 little traits underneath. So for instance, dexterity has shoot, melee, and brawl, while technical has repair, security, and medical. It's good to have these things because they let you know what kinds of things you can declare, whether that be a command or con or medical. But I don't want you to feel limited to these things. Good GMs are going to be able to lump things down into categories. For instance, if you say, I want to roll around, we might make you roll agility, which which is that right there. So let's say, for instance, a GM has described that someone is trying to get through the door and you don't want them to get through the door. You have several options here. Just looking at the sheet that you could do, you could perhaps grab the door and hope that you can outstrength them. In this instance, you would be rolling 3 dice. 3D D stands for dice, so you would roll 3 dice. So if you have 3D, that means you pick up 3 dice and you would roll those, and then you would add them up. So that's 12. So 12 is what you get, and you'd say, I got 12 to the GM. And then the GM probably has a character who also has strength, and maybe that's also 3 dice, and the GM would roll that, and wow, yeah, you are absolutely going to be able to hold this door closed if that's what the person on the other side of it rolls. But you're not just limited to grabbing. Maybe you want to barricade the door. Maybe you want to try to lock it or tie the knob to something. Who knows? All of those would fall under what's called security right there. And you'd be rolling 4 dice now. So, you have odds of getting a much better roll, which in this case you did by 1 pip. So yes, how success is determined is going to be on a variety of things. Perhaps you're rolling against the GM, as we already discussed, or perhaps you are rolling against a specific number. Sometimes a task might be you have to beat a 10 or a 15 or even a 25 if it's something really difficult. Let's say, for instance, you're having a conflict with an evil communist. Perhaps you're going to command this communist to drop his gun and leave the conflict. In this case, you'd be rolling 4d plus 2. That means 4 dice plus 2 pips. So once again, pick up the dice, roll them, add those up, and then add the number 2. Holy smokes, that is a really good roll. That's a 21, and then plus the 2, so that's a 23. I mean, wow, that guy's probably going to drop his gun and run away forever. Now, of course, be aware the GM can add modifiers to opponents sometimes. For instance, if you were trying to command the communist to give up his communist ways, that might be a little more difficult, and you might not just be rolling against his 3D willpower. Maybe you'll be rolling against his 3D willpower plus a 15 pip modifier because, you're asking the guy to completely change everything about him. That's a little harder. Once again, guys, storytelling, not trying to beat the GM. You don't have to wait for the GM to roll stuff sometimes. Sometimes you might ask the GM, hey, I just found this corpse. I want to know if I recognize the corpse. And the GM might say, just roll knowledge. And maybe you have a terrible knowledge roll, in which case, maybe you search him for identification. Sometimes the GM will just ask you to roll something. Perhaps he'll ask you to roll your awareness, which in this case is bad news. You're only rolling 1 die here because apparently this person is not very aware. So I roll that 1 die, and that's a 5 plus 2 is a 7. So this is, if you get a high enough roll, you might smell smoke before anyone else does, or you might be able to hear that person who's sneaking up behind you so that you get to attack them before they attack you. You may have noticed that while rolling dice, I have had 1 die that's always differently colored than the other. This is important. This is called your wild die. It's pretty irrelevant unless it's a 1 or a 6. If it is a 1, then you have kind of a botched attempt in a lot of ways. The 1 is fun for the GM. They get to determine usually something bad that happens. So even if you get a really good roll like that, but you got a 1, then, still something sad happens, kind of like what we saw with Han Solo. Alternatively, if you get the 6 on the wild die, you're a very happy person. That means you did really, really great. Usually something good will happen when this happens, and you'll also usually get to roll an extra die and add that to it. So now I have 2 extra pips that I can add to the whole thing. So yes, this little differently colored die can be your worst enemy or your best friend. Hey, best friend. Now, don't get too caught up in the dice in this game because that's only part of the game. It's very important to be interacting with people, to be talking, to be playing along. This is just one part of it. But the dice really come in the most during combat. 3. Combat. So combat's a really exciting part of the role-playing game. It's when you're going to be usually rolling the most dice and there's going to be lots of yelling. Combat is usually broken into rounds, and rounds equal about 3 seconds. A lot of the time during combat you're going to be standing up and you're going to be describing what your character's doing. Perhaps they're doing a punch and you're going to stand there and in slow motion kind of show where you're punching and how you're moving your body, and the GMs will tell you what to roll, and then you roll your dice and see what happens. So for instance, if you're this guy, you're probably not going to want to shoot. You're going to want to maybe depend on your melee or brawl. Melee is when you are using some kind of weapon. Brawl is like your straight up fist. So let's say I'm in a hand-to-hand combat. I'm going to be rolling 3 dice in order to punch a guy. That is called a complete failure. Now, something to be aware of in combat, because it's rounds now, the dice are going to become very important, and a lot of the times you're going to be doing more than one thing at once. For instance, if I'm in a fight where I'm fist fighting a guy, I'm going to want to be punching the guy, and also I'm going to want to evade his punches. I don't want to just take his punches usually. So a lot of times you're going to be doing 2 things, and let me give you some advice right here. Always try to do something evasive during combat. The best way to die is not do something evasive. So yeah, a lot of times you're going to be doing 2 things. Now, the problem with doing 2 things is that it is harder to do 2 things than 1 thing, and the dice are going to reflect that. So normally, when I'm rolling brawl, I'd roll 3 dice. But if I'm both brawling and evading, it's going to be -1 die on each of these rolls. So now my brawl is only going to be 2 dice, and my evade is going to be 1 die. So that's kind of scary. But hey, that's what happens sometimes. Ooh, yikes, 1. I'm probably getting punched. But I've got a pretty good punch here. I think I might be able to take this guy out. The same goes for if you want to do like 3 actions, but if you're trying to do 3 things, you're now -2D on each one of those. So if I'm trying to brawl, and jump and run, I'm going to be rolling only 1 die for each of those things. So you're not going to be very successful if you try to do 3 things at once. Usually. If you've got any stats that are like 5D or 40 plus 2, then that's when you can start doing maybe multiple things. Now remember, while you're going to be looking at this section a lot during combat, don't forget, be creative, okay? I can tell you so many times commanding or conning your way out of conflict is really helpful. Maybe you might, do some crazy security stuff during a combat. You might do some medical stuff during a combat. Maybe you want to pause and ask about what you know about this enemy during the middle of a fight. Maybe you want to search for a weapon. Maybe you want to try to sneak away. All of those things can really come in handy during combat, and don't forget that. Try to use your full arsenal of skills here. Another good thing to know is while, if you've got low evading like this guy, remember having cover is always a good thing. If you describe yourself as hiding behind this chair when someone is throwing something at you, the GMs will probably give you modifiers, and your evade might suddenly be a lot better than that 2D. Now your cruddy just 6 pip evade might be an 8, and that can make all the difference with cover. Also, some GMs are known for giving maybe an extra pip or 2 to your roll if you describe something that's really cool. So if you're really creative in the way you describe something, perhaps you grab this tripod and try to smash this into their mouth and then pull it out. And that was really violent, but nonetheless, if you're creative in your descriptions, hey, you might get some bonus points. In combat, you do eventually hurt people or get hurt, and that's where a lot of times strength comes in. So let's say you brawl and they evade, and your brawl beats their evade. If that happens, that means you hit them in the face, which means you're going to be rolling your strength, which in this case is 2D plus 2. So I roll my dice. Wow, I got a really stinking great roll there. That's an 11 plus 2 is 13. Okay, they're going to maybe roll their strength. Let's say their strength is 2D. Okay, and they get 5. Okay, you are probably really hurting them. Now in our game there are 4 wound statuses. There's stunned, that's if you slightly hurt someone, then they're just temporarily going to be down a D for a round. So if I got hit, I might be my next round when I do my brawl, which was 3D before, I'm now only rolling 2D. Now this is also if I'm rolling, 2 actions and I'm stunned, now I'm only rolling 1D, so this can really hurt. After getting stunned, there's wounded, and that's not good. That means you're down 1D for the rest of the night until you get healed. So try to find yourself some medical if this happens. Even worse than that is in-cap. In-cap's bad. In-cap means you're going to roll a die. And that die determines how many rounds you have before you're going unconscious. So in this situation, you would only have 1 round before you fall unconscious. Also, what stinks about being in-cap is you're minus 2D. So normally, when I'd be playing 4D plus 2 for my command, I'm now only rolling 2D. And then the worst kind of damage will put you to a mortal wound. Mortal wound means you're dying, which means somebody needs to get a successful medical roll on you quick or you're dead. And I can tell you right now, some of you will die. But it's okay, because if you die, you still get to partake in the shenanigans. It'll be fun no matter what. But try not to die. Once again, tip, evade. So there you go, that's how a role-playing game works. Good luck. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll be getting your character sheets to you as soon as you fill out those surveys for me, and we'll be good. Adios.